And
You're listening to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we continue looking at the current situation in the Ukraine. And with us right now is Miryam Kops, Executive Director of Tikva Odessa. And while they are an orphanage home, they had about 300 orphans, but they're also a lot more than just an orphanage, which we're going to find out. So Miryam spoke today at Ohev Tzedek in Manhattan, where I heard her speak so passionately and so warmly and important. I think people were mesmerized by what she had to say, and that's why we're having her on the broadcast tonight. So Miryam, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hi, how are you? Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. So tell us about the Tikva Odessa. I know I mentioned that it's an orphanage, about 300 young people between less than a year's age, so about 18, 19 years old. It's been around for a while. It's an amazing story. So let's start with that.
Sure. So as I was saying earlier this evening, Tikva started after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as you're all aware. So a gentleman by the name of Rabbi Baksh, who was working with Or Sameach at the time, went to Odessa to revive the Jewish community. During Soviet rule, there wasn't the opportunity to practice religious freedom, and with the fall of the Iron Curtain, it was an opportunity to revive the Jewish community. So when he went there, he found that there was still a remnant community. Men were gathering to daven weekly. As I was describing earlier this evening, that you can actually still see in the center of Odessa, there's a shul that used to be intact, and it almost looks like somebody took a big knife and sliced it down the middle. The community, what happened was it had collapsed because of a fire from a matzah factory, a small matzah factory, and they fixed up the wall, and you almost have a half a shul, and that's where people were davening at the time. And so there was definitely a desire to continue Judaism, but what Rabbi Baksh found was that there were so many children or grandchildren of these people who were left to live in state-run orphanages. And I'm getting a lot of questions nowadays because you're seeing so many reports of orphans coming out of Odessa, Ukraine, and people are asking, coming out of Ukraine, people are asking, why are there so many orphans in Ukraine? And I always say the first question is, why are there so many Jewish orphans in Ukraine? So the first thing you have to understand is how many Jewish people were still living in Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think people underestimate that even just in the Odessa region, there were at least 45,000 Jews still living there. We can go back hundreds of years and talk about how Catherine the Great offered for the locals all over Europe to come and start building lives for themselves in the Odessa region, offering them a tax-free opportunity to build up businesses. So you had a lot of entrepreneurial, sophisticated, artistic people coming to Odessa looking for opportunity. When in the early 1800s, it was a land filled with dirt. And then people took this, and even if you go today, you'll see architecture from so many different regions of Europe. You'll see Italian architecture and Turkish architecture all on one block because of what an eclectic group of people it gathered. So a lot of Jewish people from the Pale Jewish settlement gathered there. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, once the government turned its back on its people, so to speak, and there was no infrastructure, we know that they went from poor to more poorer. And so many people turned to drugs and alcoholism. There became so much mental distress and instability that I would say, parents couldn't handle their children anymore. Either they would leave them to fend for themselves, or whatever was left of a government authority would take children out of the care of their parents because they weren't considered fit to parent. And those children would end up in state-run orphanages. And as the story goes, or as when you speak to Rivox, he explains how incredible it was. When he first got there, there was 1 hour of water and electricity a day. So he and his wife Chassi would have to prepare for Shabbos in that 1 hour's time. And that just describes to you how abandoned it was of a place to the people. And he decided to open up a school in 1994 for the boys' yeshiva. And he started with a handful of boys, about 25 or so boys. And the following year, he started a school for girls. And many as the school grew, he started to see that many of the Jewish students coming at the end of the day were going back home to one of these state-run orphanages. And the conditions there were really horrific. Of course, I know so many children who now they're young adults, and they tell the stories of how if we didn't behave, we would be forced to sit in the back. And if you sit in the back, you don't get food that day. And sometimes the counselors would take the meat that's meant for the children, and they would give it to their dogs. And one boy was describing that to cure themselves of the pangs of hunger, they would sniff permanent markers so that they can get a little bit of a high and not feel the pain of the hunger. So Rabbi Box turned to one of the directors, who was a gentleman who's an expert in document research, and he said, "Just do me a favor, find me 25 Jewish boys. I have the funding, and I can put beds. I could create a dormitory situation in this school." And so this man named Sasha Zetchev, he found, after going through documents and documents, discovering which of the children are Jewish, he said, "Right, Box, I found 23 Jewish boys."
And it was
Oh,
easy
yeah,
to
what do you want me?
find because in the
Yeah,
Ukraine, you had identity papers in those days where you put down Ukrainian or Russian or Kazakh and said Jews. So it certainly was used to discriminate against the Jews. But here you're able to identify the Jews because they had the papers, right?
exactly. The KGB's ability to keep meticulous records works to the benefit of an organization looking to help strictly Jewish children. Um, yes, and exactly. People do ask, "How do you know that they're Jewish?" They made it very easy for us. You're identified as either a Ukrainian or a Jew,
Now,
and
these are words of the state, so they had to give permission to let these Jewish kids out because technically speaking, the state was in charge of them.
yeah. If you Are you talking about right now during the evacuation or?
I'm talking about in those days. We're going to get to
Oh
the
yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yes, of course. So fast forward a little bit, in 1999, a gentleman by the name of Rafael Kriskal also joined along. And he has been by the side of the community ever since. He's actually with them right now in Romania, which we'll get to. He yeah, they have a very good relationship with the locals, and there's a mutual respect and understanding. And we're thankful to the Ukrainian government for giving us permission to look after their children. And yeah, so he Sasha Zetchev said, I have 23 Jewish boys. What do you want me to do with their 26 sisters? So immediately they created a living situation for these boys and these girls, and that's how we call it Tikva Orphanage. But it's not really an orphanage; it's more of a boarding school. And the word they use in the region is called an internat.
but
Um,
they're not orphans. Some of them are, but the parents who abandoned their kids, really, right? Is that really what?
Correct. So children will come to Tikva for a number of reasons, or eventually now they'll come directly. It doesn't necessarily go through the state-run orphanage, but it's either because they were given up by the parents, or the parents were considered unfit parents, or the parents are completely gone. We have definitely a number of children whose parents are deceased, um, and some people say, do the parents ever come back for the kids? There are definitely situations where a parent will visit a child every now and again. But for the most part, it's not the case. The children become children of Tikva, and since then we've seen children grow through the system. More than 1,000 children have passed through the homes. We're talking 25 years now. I personally have had the bliss of seeing kids go from kind of standoffish, shy, maybe a little bit angry, even 10-year-olds. And there's one woman in particular, and it warms my heart because I went back after a 10-year period, and I saw her pushing around a baby stroller, a really loving, kind, caring mother. And what I've always found that was so amazing about the organization is that Tikva gives a lot of love to the children, and it's not just covering the basics. They really want each child to feel like a mensch. So it's funny because people always want to donate their used clothing, but the way we see it is we want the child to feel as normal as one could possibly feel, having not been raised by a parent. So we like to take the children shopping for themselves, we like to pick their clothing and see what works for them. And I see that it really does pay off, because you see the love that a parent gives a child that can really only come when your own love cup has been filled. And it's kind of a westernized approach to raising children. I don't know that it's typical to that part of the world. Listening to how the child feels, approaching from the psychological standpoint. The school actually, it's more than just a home for about 300 children today. It expands to a school, because many of the children who grew up in the homes stuck around and became part of the Tikva community, and they feel that this is their home. These are their brothers. These are their sisters. And the new children who come into the homes, we call them our new intakes. they're their children as well. So the same person who was raised by the orphanage is now helping run the orphanage to some extent.
But that's why you have
So that's
not just the orphans, it's or the kids who are in the orphanage, is they stay, they feel a community, they feel a sense of belonging, because even after they leave and they get married, they have really no community if their parents abandon them or they don't have parents, may not have relatives. So in a sense, you've fulfilled that void in their lives.
absolutely, and it's exactly as you say. It's filling a void, because I remember Roy Crone once saying that he was talking about being an orphan and how he says that it changes something in you. Hashem says that you look out for the orphans and the widows and the converts, and there really is a hole that a person has in them when they're growing up without an actual parent. And originally our mission was to get these children to the age of 17 and encourage them to continue a life in Israel. But what we ended up seeing was it wasn't for everybody to be sent off on your own into a foreign country, unfortunately. And some children turn to filling that hole with the same vices that got their parents through whatever pain they went through. So we've come to see that a sense of family and a sense of belonging is so crucial to, not just a healthy and happy childhood, but to an adulthood as well. And to giving a young parent the tools that parent needs to raise a child with love and compassion. So yeah, what you have today is a community. It's not just a 300 child orphanage, and it's not just a school for 900 kids. It's a community where if a mom has a baby, the other mom is going to send food to the way we do it in our community over here. You have a chesed community, and they have a great challah bake on that a couple of times a year. They do Shabbos Kiddush at the local shul. So it's a real sense of belonging, and I really think that's part of the success of Tikva.
But unfortunately, that's come to an end because you had to evacuate. So tell us about the evacuation and where did they go and what's happening with this 300 I'm calling them orphans because that's what they,
Yeah.
but for lack of a better term, but also the people that were connected to Tikva. Where did they go? What's the status?
So it's interesting. I think, like many people, we weren't really sure that this was going to happen. This war was going to happen. We were prepared. We worked really hard we worked with an Israeli security consulting firm that advised us on this disaster preparedness, and to have buses, fuel, a certain supply of food. We secured locations for lodging in the event that something like this was going to happen. And we all kind of looked at each other like, this seems a bit excessive, right? And what are the chances? But then we told ourselves, hey, we thought the same thing about COVID, right? On February 24th, the first group of people evacuated, and those were people made up of those intact families. They went as a group, people where there's parents and children, and we also are university age children, we call orphans, ages 17 to 21. Once you're able to make your own decisions legally, they went as a group to Moldova. Rafael Kriskal, Rabbi Baksh, and Jeremy Posen, they stayed behind in Odessa, really just trying to wait and see what was going to happen next. Should we go? Shouldn't we go? It was difficult because when you're talking about the children who are between ages 0 and 17, they don't really have the documentation to leave the country. But when Rafael heard that the first bomb it was about a half a mile, just half a kilometer from the girls' home went off, and the girls were really traumatized and crying. He said, "Whatever we do, we got to get out of here. We can't just sit and wait for the worst." So it was Friday morning when they boarded the buses, and they took those 180 children plus additional community members plus staff, and just started driving. And I think that there's a video that went viral where you'll see that they pulled over to the side of the road to make kiddush, but they knew that it was pikuach nefesh. They had to fend for their lives and keep going, even though they were driving on Shabbos. And they ended up in Western Ukraine, in kind of near Munkach, in that region. And they stopped right there because they didn't know when or how they were going to be able to get over the border. And Rafael didn't, and rightfully so. He wasn't about to get a bunch of 2-year-olds onto a bus to drive for another 7 hours just to be turned back around. So even after that first group went to Western Ukraine, second group went to Western Ukraine, there were still some young couples who chose to stay in Odessa, saying, "Don't worry, it's going to be fine. We'll see you. You'll see in a couple of days." But it was only a matter of time before those couples realized that things weren't getting better, and they, we had to arrange for buses to go back and get the rest of those kids. And thankfully, we had the resources to help people from other parts of the area as well. So now we have that group, Baruch Hashem. They were able to cross the border.
Problems because you have people that are maybe 20 to 60 years of age, which officially can't leave Ukraine because they need them for the army. So did you have any
Yeah.
difficulty with getting them over the border?
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, we also had to split some families apart where the mothers and children, those who didn't get through prior to that rule, were stuck on the other side of the border. So families had to make some difficult decisions about whether or not they were going to stick together or split up. I wouldn't say it was the easiest, but the first negotiation, and we're very thankful to the Ukrainian government for allowing us to bring the children over the border to safety, were the kids who were 0 to 17. And then a little while later, we were able to bring the others over, and now everybody's reunited now in Romania, and the whole crew kind of.
Get the men out too.
Yeah, we ultimately were able to get. We were ultimately able to get the husbands of these families, the fathers of these families, and the older kids, I would call them, reunited with the community.
We're speaking with Miryam Kops, the executive director of Tikva Odessa. And as you heard, they have orphans, kids who were abandoned or don't have any parents. And over 300 were taken out and on buses. I think there were buses that took them, right? That's what
Yes. Mhm.
Were they $25,000 a pop?
Something like that. Yeah.
Oh my
The
God.
prices started jumping dramatically for buses, for fuel, for personnel. We had security guards who, one by one were being picked off, drafted into the army. So we had to find replacements, and we felt here in the States that you have to do whatever it takes. We looked at it as redemption of captives. It's Pidyon Shvuyim, it's Pikuach Nefesh, and just get these kids out, get them out safely, and we'll figure the rest out later. And
So we're
and now, yeah.
we're looking at the rescue of these orphans and the community, Tikva Odessa, in, of course, the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ladies, here on the Talkline Network.
Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
With us for a little while longer, we're looking at the rescue efforts that are taking place in Ukraine. With us is Miryam Kops, executive director of Tikva Odessa. And as you heard, they are rescuing and evacuating people who are in the orphanage from less than a year old to 7 years of age, and also their dependents and families that are surrounding the Tikva Odessa community. From what I understand, Miryam, pretty much the community has been almost kept intact because you're traveling together as opposed to scattering them at different locations.
Yes, that's correct. We do have a few people still left in Odessa who couldn't travel for one reason or another. We just did a bris for one of our school graduates in Odessa on Friday. So that was done kind of in a stealthy way, and at the shul where the lights were on for just a couple of hours for the first time in weeks. But otherwise, yes, the community is together, thank God, intact in Romania. A few of our couples did go on to Israel, but for the most part, people are opting to stick together.
Now, are you doing this on your own? You mentioned you had Israeli security. Are you working in tandem with other groups that are on the ground in the Ukraine or groups in the United States? Tell us about it.
So Rafael Kriskal has been working more just as a collaborative effort, so that we could. I heard somebody mentioning earlier, we don't duplicate efforts. He has been working with because we had the buses and the extra food and the reserved spaces. He has been working with the Chabad community, IFCJ, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, the JDC. To just coordinate our efforts, and everybody's been working together really beautifully in trying to get out as many people as possible as needed. But as far as right there goes, in Romania, it's pretty much just the Tikva community. We did leave some of our staff in Kishinev to try to assist in bringing people over the border and being there prepared for them to acclimate them to what this new refugee life. But no, for the most part, it's just Tikva in this Romanian location.
Wow. What is the biggest challenge that you have in coordinating everything on the ground right now?
So it's interesting because we really just got the last of our group over the border. It was on Thursday. So really until Thursday, it was very hard to breathe, not knowing if we were going to get all of our family back together again. Our biggest challenge is really just not knowing what comes next. Perm is coming up. It's usually a really, really big time for our community. I don't have the photos that I could pull up right here, but it's one of the most exciting times for the Tikva community. Perm and Pesach usually couple together. It's a really festive time that everybody gets together in the shul. They hear the Megillah, they're dressed up, they have a great party. The kids love dressing up in costume. And now we're faced with a situation where we don't know what it's going to be like on Perm. We don't know where we're going to be for Pesach. I'd say the children are very resilient. They think that this is a trip. They want to go. They're playing soccer outside. But I think it's the couples and families that are really concerned for what comes next. Where are we going to be? Am I going to be washing my laundry in a sink for much longer? Am I going back to my home in Odessa? So it's really just the uncertainty that's the biggest challenge. And Rafal's been. He's rest assured that he has the support of his Jewish family around the world, that he should continue to try to normalize things as much as possible for the community and give them, the simcha and the Shabbos and the activities and the education where our staff is with us. They're continuing to teach the kids. So the biggest challenge is just to keep people's spirits up during all this uncertainty.
Which is the hardest part.
Yeah.
So it's certainly it's just mind-boggling. Now, you made a good point tonight that I wanted you to share with our audience, is that Purim is coming up, and people have an opportunity. They want to give out, whether it's Shalach Manos or Matanos Levionu, gifts, to the needy, and who are more needy than right now than people in Ukraine, where even those that were wealthy had to give up their apartments, their clothing, their possessions. They literally went with perhaps their coat and shirts on their back with very little else. So they, for all intents and purposes, they're all destitute.
It's really chilling because I think about it from my perspective and how much I've invested in my own home, and I always think that's my, if I ever had to just take out a mortgage, this is it. Their entire life savings, every toy they ever scraped together the money to buy for their children, they just left their lives behind, not knowing if they're going to ever see their homes again. Not more than a bag per person. Pretty much like the exodus from Egypt. They went in a hurry, and they left with nothing.
Which is the destitute situation. So I know you're helping them. Is anybody helping you money-wise to help them? And
so we have been getting a really an outpouring of support from individuals all over the country. Through social media, we're seeing a bunch of small donations come in, some bigger, some smaller. The expense is pretty tremendous when we're talking about caring for 800 people from scratch. Even the place where they're staying right now isn't set up for the winter. It's meant to be a summer place, so there's no heating and it's pretty cold. So we had to quickly buy heaters. Food is obviously an expense. Our staff, our security, the lodging itself is an expense. But I would love to, we're pulling together resources to make Perm extra special. We're seeing a lot of support from all over, from individuals, not as much from foundations, but please God, as the word gets out, we'll be able to gain some support. And it's not really just about today. I do feel that as long as we're in the news, as long as this war gets a lot of media attention, it won't be too difficult to get that that support. But I'm really worried about the future of these families and what happens in a month from now. How do you give a person a new home? How do you educate a person in a new language? How do you set somebody up for a successful future? Somebody who was an engineer in their country, what are they going to do in America or in Israel or wherever they end up? Some people are hoping to still be able to go back, but it's really too soon to tell. And yes, to your point about Matanas Le'Avyonim, it's very hard for me to say this because we're talking about my friends here and people that I know and that I love and that I've watched grow up and become self-sufficient. But unfortunately, these people have fallen into a situation where there are Avyonim. Hopefully not for too long, but at the moment, yes.
So people want to know, are you able, if people make a donation the next couple of days, that you can guarantee that they'll be distributed on Purim?
Yes, absolutely. We everything that comes into our account, we still have the ability to wire it directly to Rafael. Thank God that hasn't been interrupted, and we can absolutely earmark it so that it's distributed on Purim to the families in need. In fact, I'm pretty sure we haven't even done our shopping spree yet for these families who left with nothing, and we do want these families to be able to go out and buy something to wear, feel like a mensch again to some extent, and we can absolutely make sure that if it's, as long as it's noted that it's for Matanas Le'Avyonim, and we would 100% be able to distribute accordingly.
So if people want to help out the Tikva Odessa, and they want to give, whether it's Purim, you can give even after Purim too. I'm sure they're going to need it for Pesach. They're going to need Purim.
Yeah.
Well, how can people learn more about Tikva? How can people contribute to what you're doing?
So we have a website, tikvaodessa.org, Tikva Odessa Odessa.org, and it's an informative site. Through that site, you can also contact there's three of us in the U.S. Who handle the communications and the fundraising. So chances are you'll get me or one of two others. And we're in direct contact with the people on the ground. We speak to Rafael and Roy Baksh on a daily basis, and the
Let's give
kids.
out the phone number and the email information one more time.
Okay, so the phone number, what's that?
For the website, yes.
It's tikvaodessa.org or 917-262.
Does not have an H in there. It's without an H.
No H. Tikva, Tikva Odessa Odessa.org. And also, if you email info@tikvaodessa.org, you'll get one of us. We do have a phone number that we try to make it easy to remember. It's 917-262-1818 for life. 917-262-1818. It's been the same skeleton crew here in the U.S. all this time, and that's why I'm awake right now, because I feel a personal obligation to my family over there. That any opportunity we have to spread the word on their behalf, we have to. It's just our obligation. So
Miryam,
I'm not turning. Yeah.
I know you're doing such an important work. I want to thank you for your dedication and for what you're doing, really helping the orphans, and that's it's a big mitzvah to do, and really big to help everybody, especially the orphans. And you're doing that. Tikva Odessa has been there for a number, at least 20 some years, helping out, and now unfortunately they're scattered, but they're trying to stay together as a community as much as possible. So thank you for your service. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
I thank you.
Okay, Shavuot too.
That's